I welcome you, my dear students. I am Iqbalur Rahman. I am teaching political science in the Department of Political Science of Aligarh Muslim University. Dear students, UN peacekeeping helps countries to achieve lasting peace, supports political processes, protects the hundreds of thousands of civilians and helps guarantee ceasefires. In different ways, dear students, this mechanism developed by the United Nations as an alternative mechanism to collective security, which is exclusively provided under Chapter 7. It is the derivative of the idea of collective security. It postulates itself as a less controversial means through which the questions of peace and security may more successfully be addressed than collective security as provided under Chapter 7. Dear students, peacekeeping has emerged as a prominent enterprise available in the bag of the resources of the UN to answer the calls for peace. We are going to take the stock of the applicability of this enterprise as a conflict resolution mechanism, its mission effectiveness and efficiency dimensions. The peacekeeping missions, United Nations, since the creation of itself, has organized, created at different places. Around 71 peacekeeping missions were set up by the UNSC. Majority of them were in Africa, about 26, 19 in Americas, and 9 in Asia and Pacific, 8 in Europe, and 7 in Middle East, West Asia. There are presently 11 peacekeeping operations underway. United Nations is engaged these days in managing, operating 11 peacekeeping operations. 4 among them are in Asia, 5 in Africa, and 1 is in Europe. From 1948, 4 among them in Asia, 5 in Africa, and 2 in Europe. From 1948 and 1998, the United Nations undertook 13 peacekeeping operations involving generally lightly armed troops from neutral countries. They were first used in 1948 to observe ceasefires in Palestine and in Kashmir, in case of India and Pakistan. With the exception of the failed attempt to end hostilities in Congo, 1960 to 1964. All were mostly small operations to monitor ceasefires or perform traditional peacekeeping. Rest of the other PKOs, peacekeeping operations, peacekeeping missions, were created after the end of the Cold War. When I say after the end of the Cold War, means from 1990 onwards, when the rivalry between the Soviet Union, presently Russia, and the United States of America came to rest. Nature of conflicts also changed. Conflicts became more and more intra-state and less interstate. Intra-state wars rose in number from 15 in 1975 to 32 in 1998. Since the start of the 1990, intra-state wars averaged 28 in number annually, dear students, and therefore the increase in peacekeeping operation we witness. From 1988 to the end of 1997, there were 33 new United Nations peacekeeping missions involving Latin America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and Europe, some of which included complex peace-building, peace enforcement operations. Since the start of 1988, there were 25 new peacekeeping operations set by the United Nations Security Council. Some important Cold War peacekeeping missions we need to bring into our discussion here today. United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan was established in 1949 by the UNSC to sustain peace in Jammu and Kashmir. It happened after the war between India and Pakistan, when Pakistan tried to capture Kashmir and intervened through the tribes. Following renewed hostilities of 1971, this peace mission remained in the area to observe developments pertaining to the strict observance of ceasefire of 17 December 1971. Report thereon to the Secretary General. In 1972, when after the hostilities ended, India and Pakistan entered into agreement, India opposed the continuation of this peacekeeping mission, which continues to exist even today. Only United Nations Security Council is authorized to discontinue. This has become one of the oldest missions which was set up by United Nations Security Council in 1949. United Nations operation in Congo. It was set up by the UNSC to ensure the withdrawal of the Belgian forces to assist the government in maintaining law and order and to provide technical assistance, which were subsequently modified to include maintaining the territorial integrity and political independence of Congo, preventing the occurrence of civil war, and securing the removal of all foreign military, paramilitary, and advisory personnel not under the United Nations command, and all mercenaries. This mission displays to us a different perspective. It gives us a different experience. In this mission, the United Nations Security Council authorized the use of force. Use of force, if necessary, to prevent civil war. The United Nations attempted to expand the meaning of the peacekeeping by going beyond simply separating two independent states and monitoring ceasefire. Some United Nations members criticized this. France opposed it. Soviet Union opposed to replace the position of the Secretary General with the Troika. The then United Nations Secretary General died in a plane crash in northern Rhodesia, which we know today as Zambia. The Congo mission, dear students, raised constitutional questions about peacekeeping and military enforcement under the Chapter 6 and 7 of the United Nations Charter, as well as the role of UN Secretary General in peace and security matters. The mission was generally perceived as failure and intensified the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, now Russia. In 1990s, second generation peacekeeping missions were undertaken: Colombia, Yugoslavia, Somalia, and elsewhere, and included troops from the permanent members of the Security Council as well as from the developed and developing world. United Nations Advanced Mission in Colombia was established in 1991 to assist the Colombian parties to maintain their ceasefire during the period prior to the establishment of the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, and to initiate mine awareness training of civilian populations. Later, the mandate was enlarged to include, dear students, the training in mine clearance and initiation of mine clearance program. The mission and its functions were subsumed by United Nations Advanced Mission in Cambodia. The other important peacekeeping mission which was set up by the United Nations Security Council was United Nations Protection Force, which was initially established in Croatia to ensure demilitarization of designated areas. The mandate was later extended to Bosnia and Herzegovina to support the delivery of humanitarian relief, monitor no-fly zones, and safe areas. The mandate was later expanded to the former Yugoslavia Republic of Macedonia for preventive monitoring in border areas. When the various efforts, including the effort of the European community to stop the hostilities in 1991, proved unsuccessful, the UNSC unanimously adopted a resolution 713/1991 expressing deep concern at the fighting in the country and calling on all states to implement immediately a general and complete embargo on all deliveries of weapons and military equipments to Yugoslavia. Serious fighting, dear students, began in Croatia in 1991. When that republic and its northern neighbors, Slovenia, declared themselves independent from Yugoslavia, and Serbs living in Croatia, supported by Yugoslav People's Army, opposed this move. Bosnia also proved to be the battleground for the most brutal fighting and the most violent war crimes. When Bosnia and Herzegovina declared independence in 1992, ethnically mixed Serb militias moved to drive out Muslims from Serb majority areas, killing Muslims, Muslim women, children, carrying out systematic campaign of rape and terror, and created death and detention center. By 1994, around 250,000 people may have fallen to the war and millions were displaced. The United Nations was unsuccessful. The mission, the peacekeeping operation created by it, could not deliver for what it was mandated. The United Nations Protection Force proved ineffective. The UN demonstrated the limits of the PKO's institution in the new post-Cold War. This was an example of the limitations of peacekeeping operations. The NATO was forced to take action in matters of Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. Outside the UN framework, NATO forces arrived in Bosnia. Calls were made to capture the Serbian leaders who were charged with war crimes. In 1993, the Security Council had created the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia as the first institution of international criminal prosecution since the end of the Cold War II. Since the end of the World War II. In the context of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Rwanda and Somalia, Dear students, the United Nations peacekeeping operations concluded in failure, especially in the context of protection of civilians. Peacekeepers witnessed the mass extermination of the civilians in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Rwanda. The reason being that the peacekeeping operations do not have a clear and implementable mandate. Forces without clear and implementable mandates could not take action on time and could not even protect themselves, as has happened in case of Rwanda and Somalia. Only 2 conflicts have been recognized as genocide by the United Nations in the period after the Second World War. 2 of these are the conflicts in Bosnia, Herzegovina and Rwanda. From this point of view, it is a complete failure that the United Nations peacekeepers were not able to prevent these genocides. Even though they had peacekeepers in the conflict zones before the genocide took place. In some other missions where the UN did not record the success as expected and desired, it could not be said that altogether these missions completely failed. UN since 1945, since its creation, has used mechanism for peacekeeping in terms of going from a conflict to a peace process. This is what peacekeeping stands for. During its evolution and applicability, it has passed through different stages, recording successes, facing the challenges, and sometimes failure in not achieving the peacekeeping mandate as was set by the United Nations Security Council. The findings of the several studies demonstrate the possibilities of success of PKO's peacekeeping operations are greater if they fulfill certain conditions. One among them is the willingness and sincerity of the conflicting parties, the primary parties in the conflict. The probability of the peacekeeping operations being successful is stronger with the approval of the warring parties and the presence of ceasefire agreement between the warring parties in the region. The question arises, what to keep? Here, it means that there is peace, which the warring parties have agreed to, and the United Nations is invited as impartial party. The concept of the warring parties is an important factor because the intervention of the peacekeeping forces represented by their approval will not be seen as a threat, unlike without the consent, which will require the use of coercive force or military intervention. The second condition is impartiality and non-use of force. The main advantage of UN peacekeeping can be expressed in the form of impartiality with respect of observation and international assistance presented by the UN. For warring parties not to see the peacekeepers as a party to the conflict, the forces in operation should take military intervention only in cases where and when they are threatened. At this point, the consent of the warring parties is predominantly important. Impartiality and non-use of force. Cooperation of the outsider actors is also one of the very important conditions. The third party involvement is an important factor in conflicts. In this respect, dear students, instruments such as arms or political support to the warring parties may be presented as a decisive example of the source of the conflict, it can be stated that the countries of the region may take initiatives or actions in favor of the UNPKO's, United Nations peacekeeping operations, for a party in the conflict aimed at their own interest or activities in the area. The cooperation of the outside actors, that they should also act as impartial, is also very required in the success of any peacekeeping operations. After the evaluation, what we come to know that UN peacekeeping is clearly a cost-effective way of increasing global security, increasing the duration of post-conflict peace, reducing the lethality of ongoing conflict, and increasing the chances of conflict ending. We find that United Nations peacekeeping policies over the period of 80 years have largely been effective. The United Nations could have done considerably better. The more the United Nations is willing to spend on peacekeeping, and the more missions are provided with a strong mandate, the greater is the conflict reducing effect of the peacekeeping activities undertaken by the United Nations. We can say that the peacekeeping in general has a conflict reducing effect. However, all peacekeeping operations are not equally effective. This is the fact. It is cost-effective mechanism. There is no doubt about it, which is available to the United Nations, dear students. Strengthening this mechanism and making it more proactive would make peacekeeping a more viable instrument of addressing the questions of peace and security, and a more effective way of maintaining international peace and security than the collective security mechanism which is provided under Chapter 7. For today, my dear students, I end here. Thank you.